Hello and welcome to the nervous system. Today obviously we're going to discuss the nervous system, but for your reference, the nervous system is one of the most important systems of the body. It plays a role in just about everything we do, whether it's part of our conscious awareness, that is, exercise, or beyond our conscious control, such as regulating or changing our heart rate or blood pressure in response to exercise. Okay, the nervous system, or the neural system, also known as the neural system, has two main divisions. The CNS, or the central nervous system, which comprises the brain and the spinal cord, and represents about 90% of the entire nervous system. And the second division, or also known as the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, which is basically everything else besides the brain and spinal column. Therefore, that represents about 10% of the neural or nervous system. Okay, so our divisions are as follows. Here's our nervous system or neural system. We have our central nervous system, which is basically brain and spinal cord, or spinal column. And that represents about 90% of all neural tissue, or 90% of the entire nervous system. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which, as mentioned, is everything else. Therefore, about 10% of the nervous system, or the neural system, is comprised of the peripheral nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is the control centre of the brain. Messages get sent to the brain, they are integrated, and responses have been processed and sent from the brain. The peripheral nervous system basically works as a delivery service, sending messages to the brain and spinal cord to get integration, to get information, and to get appropriate responses, and then to carry that information to the desired areas of the body. So the central nervous system has no further divisions. However, the peripheral nervous system does have additional divisions. And they are a motor division, also known as an efferent division, E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T, and a sensory division, also known as an afferent, A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T division. And we have receptors as part of the sensory division, and we have effectors as part of the motor or efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. Now, this is starting to look a little bit crowded and it's starting to look a little bit complex, but it's actually a lot more simple than you think. Let's look at a real world example. I'm dehydrated, I'm thirsty, I need to take a drink of water to ensure my hydration status and to prevent any ill health that can be caused by dehydration. Now, specialised receptors found in the peripheral nervous system will sense that information. Will be told that the body's dehydrated and running a risk of ill health. Now, these receptors will send a message through the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system to the brain or the central nervous system. So these receptors that obtain this information will send that information again via the peripheral nervous system directly towards the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, where the information gets processed, integrated, and an appropriate response offered. Brain and spinal cord decide on the information and that the body is dehydrated and needs to take a drink. So they send a command back to the peripheral nervous system. This time, however, it doesn't go through the sensory division, it goes through the motor division or efferent division. So it goes through this division to an effector. Now an effector in this example is probably the bicep muscle. It needs to contract and shorten so I can take a drink of water. It is responsible for carrying out the commands. So basically sensory, getting information and sending that information to the brain, and motor, which means carrying out the commands of the brain. And that's basically how the nervous system works. 90% of which is the central nervous system. The other 10% is this process here of sensory and motor commands. Now the motor division can be further divided into a somatic and autonomic division. Somatic basically means it's within our conscious control. We are aware that we're doing it. We have control over it. That is, I am taking the drink and I'm consciously aware of that, and I am facilitating that action and wanting to undertake that action. The autonomic division is things beyond our conscious control or conscious awareness. It is involuntary, such as heart rate or blood pressure changes in response to exercise. So the somatic is voluntary, or the somatic division of the efferent nervous system is voluntary, whereas the autonomic division of the efferent or motor nervous system is involuntary or beyond our conscious control. And you've got the following diagram, or a similar diagram, which follows on the next slide, which highlights this chain of events. Okay, and that's the diagram that you've got in your lecture notes. It basically demonstrates the flow of what happens in the neural system from information being sensed, obtained by receptors, being sent along the peripheral nervous system, or the peripheral nervous system division of the neural system to the CNS, that information being sent back down the motor division and being carried out by effectors or target organs responsible for carrying out the actions, of which can be within our control or beyond our control or outside of our conscious awareness. Okay, neurons. The basic structure, the fundamental or smallest unit of the neural system are neurons, and they can fall into two categories. They can be motor or sensory, and that makes sense looking at our breakdown or flow chart of events. We can have sensory neurons down the sensory or afferent division of the peripheral nervous system, or we can have motor neurons which form the motor or efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. And as we know, sensory neurons will send information to the CNS for integration. Motor neurons will send information back to the target organs, target muscles, to carry out those commands. So let's look at a neuron at a fundamental level or cellular level. Motor neurons and sensory neurons look alike. So here we have a large body of a neuron, and we call that the soma. We have extensions that come out of the soma, and they are called dendrites. We have a long shaft extending from the body of the soma, or body of the neuron, and that's known as an axon. And the axon is actually covered by a conducive water-like gel that's called a myelin sheath. Now the process of communication, which is one sensor, let's say the first sensory neuron obtains information about a change or a threat to the body, it passes that information to the next neuron in sequence, or the next sensory neuron in sequence. This process takes place thousands and thousands of times before that information gets to the brain or spinal column, the brain or central nervous system. Now this process is an electric process. That is, there's electrical energy that is being transferred along with the neural message. And having a nice conducive gel on the outside of the axon ensures a nice, smooth, efficient transfer of message from one neuron to the next. Okay, so basically what we have now is another neuron in series. And let's say it's a sensory neuron. Motor neurons and sensory neurons are the same. But in this example, we're saying it's a sensory neuron. We have the large body, the soma, we have the dendrites, and we have the axon, which is encapsulated by a myelin sheath. And the neural message of thirst, if we use that example that we have so far, the neural message of thirst is passed from this axon, or this neuron I should say, to the next sensory neuron in series. And the point that this occurs is normally this point right here, where the axon meets the soma. That is known as a synapse. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes that doesn't happen that efficiently, and that's where these dendrites come in handy, because they can capture the message if it's not a smooth transfer of message at where the axon meets the soma. So the synapse, which is the point of communication between neurons, could occur at the dendrites as well as a backup measure or safety net measure. Now, let's reverse the example and say that these are motor neurons. They're carrying commands away from the central nervous system to a target muscle. And if you use the first example, the target muscle was the bicep muscle. What we can say, let's assume that this neuron is the last neuron in series. We get to the muscle right down here at the end, which is the bicep. We can say that the point of communication between the last motor neuron in series and the target organ is known as the neuromuscular junction. Now let's say it was a flight or fight response instead of a thirst response. Therefore, the target organ wasn't a muscle, it was a gland to release adrenaline. Then we can say that the point of communication between the last motor neuron and the gland that's responsible for releasing adrenaline, that would be the neuroglandular junction. So again, fundamental units of the nervous system, thousands and thousands of thousands found in series. They all communicate from one to the other. Sensory neurons communicate along the sensory pathway through the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system, where the message is integrated by the brain and a motor command is sent along the efferent division of the peripheral nervous system to an effector. And that could be an autonomic or somatic division. And this process takes place with thousands and thousands and thousands of neurons in series. They're all the same. However, one are motor neurons, therefore carrying commands away from the central nervous system. The other are sensory neurons, which carry information to the central nervous system. Thank you for your time, and good luck with your studying.